Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels with a subscriber-submitted deck. Remember, if you do want me to play one of your decks in a future subscriber series, then be sure to either leave me it down in the comments section below, or email me the list, or even send it on Twitter. Whichever one is fine with you is fine with me. So this week, we're going to be taking a look at a Dimir Artifact Improvise deck, submitted to us by Peter Green, so thank you very much for the deck list, sir. Let's have a look at it, shall we? So, Improvise is a mechanic introduced in Kaladesh, or was it Ether Revolt, never mind. It says that your artifacts can help cast this spell. For each artifact you tap after this, you can cut one colourless mana off of it. So, the more artifacts we have, the cheaper our spells become, but they can never get rid of the coloured mana. So, we're going to try and make our spells really cheap and work on that. So we're going to be using a lot of removal and things like that, but we're also going to be using Tezzeret's Touch for one of our win cons. So this allows us to turn any artifact into a 5/5 creature in addition to its other types, and then if it dies, we get the artifact that it was attached to back to our hand. So we can swing in with some 5/5s on turn 3, which is pretty sweet. Finally, another win condition is Mechanized Production. So a lot of you guys have been waiting for me to play this card, and this is not the final time you will see this card. I'm going to be building a deck around it myself. But in this particular case, we're going to be working with Mechanized Production, and this is another win con as well. We'll get back to what it does in a second. Let's go right to the beginning of the deck, shall we? We've got 3 Bone Saws. So these are a 0 mana artifact that says equipped creature gets +1/+0. So we can stick these on our Tezzeret Touch artifacts if we want to swing in for a little bit of extra damage, but what they really are is free mana for our improvised cards essentially. Put them down on the battlefield for 0 mana, and we can tap them to pay 1 colourless on our improvised spells, so it's actually generating mana in terms of our improvised cards. So that's why it's there. I'm not entirely sold on it. It may be that there are better cards to put in this place, but for now we're going to be playing around with this, and then maybe on the episode 3 I might change them out. We'll see. We then have Renegade Maps, so for 1 mana we've got an artifact that says Renegade Map enters the battlefield tapped. And then when it untaps, you can tap it again, sacrifice it, and search your library for a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So we've got 4 copies of this. This is an artifact that we can use for Improvise, but we can also thin out our deck and find a land. And Renegade Maps allowed us to cut down on our mana as well. So we're actually only running 20 lands because the Renegade Map for 4 actually works out perfectly on our curve. So you could consider these artifact versions of Evolving Wilds essentially. So that's why we're running these. They're pretty sweet. They also trigger Fatal Push's Revolt ability. So Fatal Push is 1 black mana, instant speed, destroy target creature if it has converted mana cost 2 or less. So right at the very beginning of the game we can get rid of Sylvan Advocates and lots of early game threats as well for 1 mana, which is not too bad. But if we can trigger Revolt, then we can destroy a creature if it has converted mana cost 4 or less instead. So that could get rid of Kalatas and a lot of really big creatures as well. So we're running all 3 copies of this because we can trigger Revolt quite easily. And we also have things like Alchemist Vial to sacrifice, Implement of Malice to sacrifice, so there's plenty of ways to trigger the Revolt and get full value out of the Fatal Push. We then have Battle at the Bridge, so for X and black sorcery speed, it has Improvise, so we can tap our artifacts to generate mana for it. It says target creature gets -X until the end of the turn, and we gain X life. So we could use this to stabilize, we could also use it to get rid of big creatures as well. So we pay X, which is however much we want to pay, so that could be all of our mana, so it could be 6 and a black to deal -6/-6 to an opponent, but we can also use the Improvise to add extra to that as well. So if we tap all of our artifacts, we'll probably have about 3 or 4 on the battlefield minimum when we want to use this. So we can actually, for 1 black mana and tapping all of our artifacts, we can give something -4/-4 and gain 4 life, which is actually pretty awesome. We then have Alchemist Vial, so for 2 mana we have an artifact that says whenever Alchemist Vial enters the battlefield, draw a card. You can pay 1 and tap it, sacrifice it, Alchemist Vial. Target creature can't attack or block this turn. So every time it enters the battlefield, we draw a card, and we can also use it to lock down our opponent's big creatures. Maybe they've cast an Ulamog, and we want to buy a few turns for maybe our Mechanized Production or something like that. We'll sack this for 1 to stop it attacking every turn, which is pretty sweet, for as long as we have vials, that is, anyway. We then have Implement of Malice, so for 2 mana, an artifact. It says pay black, sacrifice the Implement of Malice. Target player discards a card. You can only do this as a sorcery. And when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you get to draw a card. So for 3 mana, essentially, we draw a card, they discard a card. But it's also another artifact that we can use Improvise on. And this ability does not cost a tap as well. So if we have an Improvise spell, we can tap it first to generate that mana for the Improvise. And then we can pay the black if we want to as well, to sacrifice it. Just to do with ordering, it's not going to make a big deal. But that is an outcome that could happen anyway. We then have 2 copies of Unsubstantiate, so for 1 and a blue, instant speed, return target spell or creature to its owner's hand. So we can use this to bounce one of our opponent's big creatures. Maybe they've cast some sort of removal spell for our mechanized production and we need to buy ourselves an extra turn. We can actually remand that back to their hand essentially. So they have to cast it again. If they also tap out to cast something as well, Unsubstantiate can essentially be a take an extra turn spell in a sense. If you tap them out and they have nothing on board, then you've essentially ended their turn with an Unsubstantiate. So it's really cool for that kind of thing. Maybe run more copies, maybe even run some more counter spells perhaps. I'm not sure about that. We'll see how the deck plays out when we get there anyway. We then have Esper Zoa, so for 2 and a blue, artifact creature, Jellyfish. It is a 4/3 flyer that says at the beginning of your upkeep you may return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. So at the very beginning of every upkeep we have to return an artifact. That could be an Alchemist File so that we can play it again and draw a card. It could also be a Bone Saw so that we can just cast it for free so that we can keep the Esper Zoa on the battlefield for free. That's one of the upsides of Bone Saw in this deck, is that Esper Zoa has no upkeep cost essentially to keep it around, which is cool. But we can obviously benefit occasionally from certain artifacts entering the battlefield like Alchemist File. But it's also a 4/3 flyer in the air for 3, which is pretty good, a pretty good threat. So if we can keep that on the board for long, we won't be too far away from just beating our opponent to death. So it's pretty sweet. Tezzeret's Touch, we've touched upon this. It is a 1 blue and black enchantment aura that says Enchant Artifact. Enchanted Artifact is a creature with base power and toughness 5/5 in addition to its other types. And then if that artifact is put into the graveyard, return that card to its owner's hand. So we could stick this on maybe an Alchemist File. And if it dies, we get the Alchemist File back, which means we get a redraw off of it. So we can kind of cantrip our Tezzeret's Touch if it dies. But it's also going to turn all of our artifacts essentially into 2 mana 5/5s or even a 0 mana 5/5. It will have Summoning Sickness when it does become a creature though, so we can't just Bone Saw Tezzeret's Touch. We have to have this on the battlefield for a turn before it becomes a creature. Otherwise we can't swing in and surprise our opponent, so you've got to keep that in mind as well. Then we have Murder, so for 1 and 2 black, instant speed, destroy target creature. So this is for all of the creatures that our Battle at the Bridge or our Fatal Pushes can't hit. So this is just for those big mana creatures, if we can help it anyway. We might just have to put them on some early game creatures depending on the pressure that we've got on the board against us. But destroy target creature pretty much hits everything as long as it doesn't have hexproof or indestructible. We can get rid of it, which is awesome. We then have Mechanized Production. So for 2 and 2 blue, Enchantment Aura. It says enchant artifact you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that is a copy of the enchanted artifact. Then, if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, you win the game. So every single turn that Mechanized Production is attached to an artifact, we'll get a copy of that artifact. And if we hit 8, we win. So we could stick it on things like our Bone Saw, for example. Not that we want to do that. But Renegade Map, so we can maybe sack the tokens for land value if we're not going for the Mechanized Production win. We can just use this to thin out our deck of lands so that we draw better. We can also stick it on Alchemist File, though I do hear that this is actually bugged and can cause crashes, but we'll have to see, won't we? But if we stuck it on Alchemist File, every single turn we'd draw an extra card. So we'd be drawing 2 cards per turn then. So if it's against a control deck and we've just resolved Mechanized Production, if they can't get rid of it, that's card advantage that's going to be able to push us through to the end of the game and hopefully pull out a victory. But we could also put it on an Implement of Malice as well, and every single time we get a copy we could pay the black and just eat our opponent's hand away until they've got nothing. That's also an option as well. So there are many things that we could stick Mechanized Production on, but those are pretty much the best ones. Tezzeret also has artifact tokens that generate mana as well, so we could maybe ramp with a mechanized production if we want to do that kind of thing. Next we've got Yahenni's Expertise, so for 2 and 2 black, sorcery speed, all creatures get -3/-3 until the end of the turn, and then you may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So, we wipe our opponent's board, and if anything doesn't die, we could maybe murder, or if we've cleared the board, we can then use Tezzeret's Touch for free, make our Bonesaw a 5/5, swing through onto our opponent. We could maybe land an Esperzoa, or we could bounce something. We've got lots of options, essentially, for the free converted mana cost, but the best thing to do is wipe your opponent's board and then stick a Tezzeret's Touch down for that maybe lethal shot. So that's what we've got available. Next we've got Tezzeret the Schemer. This is one that I've added in myself, mostly as a flavour thing. If I'm seeing blue-black artifacts, I want to get Tezzeret in there. But he is also kind of useful, just even more as a flavour card anyway. So for 2, a blue and a black, we have a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. His +1 ability says we can create a colourless artifact token named Ethereum Cell that has the ability to sacrifice itself, add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. So it's also an artifact, so we don't have to sacrifice it to generate that mana. We could even use the Improvise to tap those little artifacts as well, so we don't even have to sack them. What we can't do is tap them and then sack them, because the ability to generate the 1 mana off of them actually requires you to tap it. So we can use it for the Improvise without sacking them, but we can't then sack them after that to generate an extra mana, so we're not doubling down, unfortunately. But we do have a -2 ability as well. Target creature gets +X/-X until end of the turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So we could, if we have 4 artifacts, for example, and our opponent's got a clear board and they're tapped out, we could do this on one of our creatures, give it +4/-4, so we could swing in for a super amount of damage. We can also use this as a removal spell as well. If we've got 6 artifacts on play, we can get rid of most things, like Torrential Gearhulks and things like that, just for the -2 ability, so there's really good chance that that has some sort of application to the strategy at hand. But the -7, the ultimate, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 5/5. So his ultimate essentially is every single turn we have a Tezzeret's Touch, is pretty much what he's going to be doing. So it goes back to being an artifact as well, so they have to respond to it at instant speed if they want to use creature removal against it, that kind of thing. So we've got that available to us as well. They do not go back to being just simple artifacts as well. They stay as 5/5s, which is interesting. I didn't think about it that way, but there you go. We then have Reverse Engineer, so for 3 and 2 blue, sorcery speed, it has Improvise, which means we can cut the 3 colourless off to make it a 2 mana sorcery speed to draw 3 cards. This is likely going to be the case as well, so we'll be able to draw 3 for 2 mana, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, it's sorcery speed, but I think that kind of value is pretty good. Maybe Glimmer of Genius is just better, I'm not entirely sure, but a 2 mana draw 3 is better in some circumstances than a 4 mana scry 2, draw 2, gain 2 energy that we don't use, for example, as well. We then have Torrential Gearhulk, so for 4 and 2 blue, artifact creature construct. It's a 5/6 with flash, and it says when it enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant card from your graveyard without paying its converted mana cost. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, you exile it instead. So we essentially flash back a card from our graveyard as long as it's an instant. So we could flash. That's another reason as well why I think Glimmer might be better than Reverse Engineer here. Just for that alone. Because we could even copy Torrential Gearhulk with mechanized production, and then we could copy all of our Glimmers after we've cast them into the graveyard on our upkeep. So there is a good application for that. Maybe I'll play around with it for the 3rd episode, but we'll see. But other than that, we've also got Murder for instant speed, so we could use our Torrential Gearhulk to remove a creature at instant speed. We could bounce a creature, or technically temporarily counter a card as well. Or we could even use Fatal Push if that's available. So those are our options. I would probably like more instants as well, so maybe Reverse Engineer is going to have to go out for Glimmer. We then have Noxious Gearhulk, so for 4 and 2 black, artifact creature, construct. It's a 5/4 with menace, and it says when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. So we can use this to get rid of any of our opponent's bigger creatures and gain all of the life to maybe stabilize from it as well. It has menace, which makes it difficult to block. Menace means that you have to block with 2 or more creatures in order to stop it from attacking in, essentially. So it can be a little bit difficult to deal with in that sense, and we could even stick a mechanized production on that so that in every upkeep we destroy a creature and we get another menace creature down on the battlefield as well to really, really stop our opponent and make it awkward for them on the combat step. So that's an option for us as well. Finally, we have Herald of Anguish. First time I'm playing with this card, but we'll see how well it does. It's 5 and 2 black for a 5/5 creature with flying. It has Improvise, so we can tap 5 artifacts to make it just a 2 mana 5/5 with flying, which is pretty awesome. That's where the Bone Saws come in as well, as a generating mana, so we can get this guy down pretty swiftly. But he also has another ability as well, which can be really useful in the early game. Excuse me, sorry. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent discards a card, so we can eat away our opponent's hand essentially, while also swinging in for 5 over the top. And he's also got another ability as well. It says 1 and black, sacrifice an artifact, the target creature gets -2/-2 until the end of the turn. So we can clear away our opponent's little creatures if they've got them there to block. Maybe we've got some Tezzeret's Touches down on the ground, but they've got plant tokens or something like that. We can sacrifice a bone saw or something like that to get them out of the way. So there are a fair few applications for this. If our opponent's going to kill our Tezzeret's Touch as well, we could maybe sacrifice it in response to get the artifact back. If it was going to die anyway, we could use that as an additional little bit of value there as well. So that's essentially the deck, guys. Let's go on to the mana base. It's pretty simple. We've got 7 islands and 7 swamps. Plenty of basics to grab with our renegade maps. So that's one thing to note. We also have Sunken Hollows as well that say that it ends the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. It's also an island swamp, which is relevant for the buddy lands that are coming up next as well. But likely these Sunken Hollows are going to be able to come into play untapped because we are running a lot of basics and renegade maps are going to be able to find them as well. We then have Drowned Catacombs. Drowned Catacombs ends the battlefield tapped unless you control an island or a swamp. So it adds blue or black. Comes into play tapped unless we have a basic island or swamp, or even our Sunken Hollows, which are also island swamps as well. So Drowned Catacomb can come into play as early as turn 2 untapped, essentially. We then finally have Inventor's Fair. This is a legendary colourless land. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. So that's likely to be in effect at all times for the most part. It adds the ability to add colours to our mana pool. We are running only 2 colours, so that colourless mana is not any kind of problem for us whatsoever. But it also has another ability as well. You can pay 4, sacrifice the Inventor's Fair, and search your library for an artifact card. Reveal it and put it into your hand and shuffle your library. You can only do this if you have 3 or more artifacts. So the artifacts that we can grab are obviously the Implement of Malice, the Alchemist Vial, Renegade Map, and Bone Saw. So there's not a great deal to grab, but maybe if we are... Oh, also Espezoa as well. Forget about you because you're not colourless. Always throws me off. We can also grab the Gearhulks as well. Yes, now that I remember. So there is a lot to grab, and it always depends on the situation at hand. Maybe we've got a mechanized production in our hand, but nothing to put it on, so we could sack the Inventor's Fair for an Alchemist Vial, an Implement, or something like that, so that we can stick the mechanized production on and start our win con going. It'll take 8 turns from that point, but I'm sure we can delay our opponent, because that's pretty much what we plan on doing. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for the deck. If you are interested in seeing some matches, they should already be up already, and there'll probably be a link to it at the end of this video on the end card as well as a playlist for the entire Magic series for Aether Revolt. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did like the deck and you want to see more of it. Hit the little bell icon right next to the subscription button to be notified when I release new videos. And don't forget to check out the announcement video as well for the subscriber tournament. You've got until April 6th to build a deck and submit it. Tomorrow I will be releasing a video on where to submit it and what you need to do for that kind of thing as well. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you next time. Bye bye.